Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a new type of interview this afternoon from MX, as I'm joined not just by the MX author and creator of the Redacted Sherlock Holmes series, Orlando Pearson, but also by the reader of the audio versions of many of the Orlando Pearson stories, but in particular, volume 7 in the series. It's Keith Spilsbury. So good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now,
Pleasure to be here.
Now, judging by your backgrounds, you're both in Baker Street, but whereabouts are you physically?
Well, I'm not far from Wisteria Lodge, actually. Wisteria Lodge is in Esher, and Esher's about 3 miles down the road from here. Conan Doyle set quite a lot of his stories in the Surrey countryside, so the Speckled Band is at Leatherhead, the Reigate Squires is in Reigate, which is about 8 miles away from here. Leatherhead's about 6 miles, so I'm in good Holmesian country.
Fantastic. And Keith, whereabouts are you?
I'm in Staffordshire at the moment in the Potteries, but we divide our time between here and Dorset. I live in a small village just outside Dorchester called Sidling St. Nicholas, and we're in the process of gradually moving there full time.
Fantastic. My wife and I do like Dorchester. We visited there last year as a possible place for us to move out of London to as well. So I thought it might be interesting for readers to find out how from Orlando how he got into writing Sherlock Holmes stories, and then maybe Keith, you could tell us how you got into narrating.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm an accountant by background, but many years ago I studied German literature, and one of the writers who fascinated me was the man you can see on your screen, Franz Kafka. And he wrote his most famous story, two most famous stories. One is about a man who gets turned into an insect, and the other is about a man who wakes up one morning and is arrested, and he's put on trial but never told what the charge is. The trial is all about. And I always felt that I could solve the mystery of what the character in the trial was put on trial for. And it eventually occurred to me the best way of doing that was to have Sherlock Holmes solve the mystery. So one of the other characters in the trial comes to Sherlock Holmes and asks him to solve what's bugging her neighbour, who's a man called Joseph Kay. And the result of that was a story which was one of the first ones that MX Publishing was kind enough to publish, called The Trial of Joseph Carr. Keith narrated the German version of that not very long ago, which was very exciting. It's the first time that I'd been narrated in German, and since then I've published 9 books of Sherlock Holmes stories, including 7 books of short stories, a collection of plays, and a collection and a novel. And Keith has been kind enough to read several of my short stories in English and my novel. So it's been a very exciting time.
Fantastic. And Keith, how did you get into narrating stories?
Well, like Orlando, I too was a student of German, and in fact, the German language has enabled me to enter the world of work and in many export roles, which have taken me all over Europe and many German-speaking countries, and I've been able to use that language right up to the present day. In my current work and also in narrating for Orlando. But I suppose the narrating really began with my children. I used to love reading to them. But they would always insist on me doing different voices for the characters, and they were very critical if I didn't get one quite right. They would demand that I reread it in the right voice. So I had some pretty demanding critics right from the start. But I think probably a couple of years ago or so, I decided I'd like to get into narrating proper, and I had a couple of early attempts reading The Wind in the Willows and Treasure Island, but the recording quality wasn't really good enough. So I set myself the task of finding out how to do it properly, and in fact, it was you, Steve, that gave me my first my first commission for a book called The Punishment of Sherlock Holmes, and I haven't really looked back since.
Fantastic. Yeah, I do remember that. Sadly, both of the authors that wrote The Punishment of Sherlock Holmes are no longer with us, but it's a very unusual book, actually, with the basically stories and puns that the two authors had collected over 4 or 5 decades. And some of it makes you laugh and some of it makes you want to cry and cringe. But it's definitely a very, very fun book. Orlando, tell us, remind us what's in Volume 7, because Volume 7 has been out in print and ebook for a little while, but tell us what's going to be on the audio version.
Yeah, it came out last April, I think it was. So it's been out nearly 9 months, and it's been a while. It always takes a while for the audio version to come through, because it's making audio versions is time consuming. So my accounts of Sherlock Holmes have always been keen to underline the historicity of Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock Holmes is always dealing with real people in my stories. So in Volume 7, he deals with 2 poets who are on the next slide. There we go. We can see Dante Rossetti, and we can see A.E. Housman, and they're 2 of my favourite poets, actually. And Holmes deals with both of them. One is a very young man. He deals with Dante Gabriel Rossetti in 1869, and one much later on he deals with A.E. Housman in 1916. And he also in Volume 7 he also deals with the model, who's a lady called Elizabeth Siddal, and when her picture comes up, she was a strikingly beautiful woman. She has the most amazing auburn-coloured hair, and she was the inspiration. She was the muse of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and she was a very beautiful model for an artistic movement, an inspiration for an artistic movement called the Pre-Raphaelite Society, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, of which Rossetti was a chief exponent. So we have 2 real poets. We have a real model who I'm sure you'll show in a sec. There we go, and you can see her hair is absolutely stunning, and it obviously helps that the necklace is amber in colour. But it's not just poets and artists. We also have an Irish patriot who's on the next slide. That's Roger Casement, and he was hanged for treason in 1916. If you look at, we get to the next slide, we can see his trial. That's a capital trial. It's not a very good reproduction, unfortunately, where that's Casement right at the back of the court with the beard. And I'm afraid he came to a sticky end a few weeks later. And that man there is his executioner. That's a man called John Ellis. He called Casement the bravest man he'd ever had his misfortune to execute. And I don't know how much comfort that was to Casement at the time. But it's not just famous people, and these are all some of these people are very, very famous. We also have look at Holmes' association with Mary Harris Smith. And Mary Harris Smith was the first female accountant. She had a practice in the city, and in The Stockbroker's Clerk, Holmes introduces himself as an accountant called Mr. Harris. And I have to say, I only assume he did have an association with Mary Harris Smith, and there is a plaque to Mary Harris Smith in the City of London. I'm rather disappointed they haven't yet got round to adding the fact that she was associated with Sherlock Holmes. As you can see, she lived to a good old age. She lived to be 90, which in those days was an exceptionally good age. And then in the last story, we hear about Dr. John Watson's lobbying activities. So in the next story, we hear about his lobbying activities on behalf of a whiskey, and the picture that'll come on the next slide. Sorry, I got that wrong. Just to show this is live. Those are 2 kings that Sherlock Holmes becomes involved with. This is a chase through London looking for a missing artifact associated with those two kings. The king on the right is James II, who had to leave this country in rather a hurry, and the king on the right is William of Orange, who succeeded King James II, and the story is the story is a chase through London to find a missing artifact belonging to James II, and Mycroft Holmes features heavily in this story. Mycroft Holmes displays the Machiavellianism which I like to portray him with. And then we come to the last story, and that's a man associated with the world's most famous whiskey. I better not name the name, but the whiskey in my story is called Ronnie Talker. And this is a story about how how big companies squeeze small companies out of the market, and that is a picture of the man behind the whiskey, very similar to Ronnie Talker whiskey. So as you can see, all my stories have a background in historic reality, and that's because Sherlock Holmes was a historical person, and I do place great weight on I do spend a lot of time getting my details right. So all my history is very carefully checked, and I do think that's important for my stories.
I think that's the last slide, so we can probably stop the slides there and then jump out to the two of you, Orlando, if that's all right.
Yeah, great.
And we'll start maybe with a question for Keith. What difference does it make to you when you're narrating, knowing that you're dealing with real life historical events, as opposed to when you're doing some of our other fiction, which I guess is all made up?
Well, I've always loved history, and I think Orlando's stories give you a fascinating insight into some sometimes not very well known historical facts. And in my case, as part of preparing for the narration, I like to really read into the background, the historical background of the characters that Orlando describes. Partly actually to understand the historical events better, but also to understand the characters a little bit more. So I'll read around and look at the any commentary that was available about what their characters were like, what they looked like, what age were they when this story was being written, all to try and build a picture in my own head of what they might look like, what they might sound like, and if they had any mannerisms or any particular characteristics that would help bring out the depth of character in each particular person. So I just find it fascinating, and I know Orlando's a stickler for detail as well. So I have to make sure that I get all my pronunciation right, and there is a lot of foreign language, a lot of foreign words in the stories. So I always double check on how to pronounce if on the internet if I'm not quite sure, but hopefully hasn't had to pick me up too many times. I think one thing that we were particularly aware of was particularly with things like French and German accents, for example. There are a number of characters in Orlando's books that speak both of those languages, but also Irish, Welsh, and a few others, to name a few. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't sound like the cast of Allo, Allo. So for me, it was really quite a challenge to find the right pitch for some of the German characters, for example, or French. So it was finding a nice balance there to make them believable.
And for our American listeners, I do encourage you to go onto YouTube and search for episodes of Hello Hello to see how offensive the accents absolutely are, in both the French and German accents in that as well. So I definitely agree with you on that one, Keith. And and Orlando likes to weave Mycroft into some of the stories. How do you find narrating Mycroft? Because he's an interesting character.
I love Mycroft secretly. I think it's a love-hate relationship you're supposed to have with him, really. I really like the fact that there's this sort of interplay between the two brothers where they're constantly trying to outdo one another in terms of their intellect and their acute powers of observation. As Orlando said, Mycroft is truly Machiavellian, and it's lovely actually when Holmes is sometimes able to actually upstage him or outwit him, and those little episodes are really something to look forward in Orlando's stories.
Fantastic. And Orlando, what's coming next for audio versions of the redacted Sherlock Holmes?
Well, we're in quite a strange situation because Keith completed Volume 7, which I'm very excited about. We haven't actually done all the stories in Volume 6. So there are 4 stories left to do in Volume 6, and I'm really excited that Keith will be doing those. So watch out for Holmes at the beginning of the First World War and at the end of the Second World War, in actually a very unpleasant story. He will also discover Dr. Watson, who Dr. Watson marries the second time, as he obviously marries Mary Morstan the first time. We're never told. We've never been told until now who he married the second time. But if you look out for Volume 6 of the redacted Sherlock Holmes, Keith will reveal who the second wife of Dr. Watson is. And we also meet, and this is a little roll of drums, because on the next slide we're going to have Holmes's real life older sister Augusta. And Augusta Holmes was a real-life French composer in the Paris Conservatoire in the 19th century, and she wrote over 1,000 pieces of music. And next one down, there we go. And she is Sherlock. She was born in 1847, so it is conceivable that she was Mycroft Holmes's twin sister. But Mycroft was 7 years older than. Mycroft Holmes was 7 years older than Sherlock, and this lady was also born in 1847, so it is conceivable that she was Mycroft's twin sister. It is, of course, conceivable that Mr. Holmes Sr. Produced 2 children in 1 year, not necessarily by the same woman. We're not told about that yet, though we may find out at some point. But that is Augusta Holmes. She was on Radio 3 only the other day, so I can recommend her music. She wrote some absolutely lovely things. And as another announcement about Mycroft Holmes is that I've unearthed Mycroft Holmes's political memoirs, and I'm editing them for publication. At the moment, Mycroft Holmes is negotiating the armistice between the French and British and German troops in 1918. So he's at Compiègne in France in November 1918. And he's very busy. It's a big job negotiating an armistice. So, and Keith very kindly agreed to narrate that what's going to be called a study in statecraft, which are the political memoirs of Mycroft Holmes, and I'm hoping that comes out in the autumn.
It's fantastic news. Very much looking forward to that. And will there be any more redacted Sherlock Holmes?
I hope so. I have this funny habit where each time I finish a story, I think that's it. So, and then as soon as that happens, an idea occurs to me. Once I have an idea, I can't let it go. So I wrote a story. The end of Volume 5 has an entirely an entirely heretical suggestion that Sherlock Holmes may not have been the son of, may not have been of human origin, that he may have been of divine origin rather than human origin. And I have that just about, I have Watson just about to make that realization when a thunderbolt strikes Baker Street. And I wrote that and I thought, that's it, I can't top that. And as soon as I put my pen down, a new idea occurred to me. So I started writing. Okay, I wrote Volume 6 at that point. So if you're looking for, if you ever get fed up with my writings and want to read what should have been the final one, the end of Volume 5 does have Baker Street being struck by a thunderbolt. Though Watson, Holmes, and Mrs. Hudson all survive, and Holmes and Lestrade go off on the next case immediately afterwards. And I did think that was it, and then more ideas came to me. So I'm looking forward to completing Mycroft Holmes and then maybe some more Sherlock.
But no historical character is safe from the discoveries of Orlando.
What a great way of putting it.
Yes, fantastic. So thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. I'm really looking forward to the Mycroft Holmes papers as well. I wondered if you were going to call them the redacted Mycroft Holmes, but I prefer the title you've given it.
It's going to be a novel rather than it's going to be a collection of short stories with a wrapping. So it's a novel. So it'll be Dark Arts, Dark Acts, which had Sherlock Holmes in Berlin in 1940 and 1941, which Keith was kind enough to narrate. That was the first redacted novel, and this will be the second redacted novel.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and look forward to many more stories penned by Orlando and brought to life by
I can't wait.
Neither can I.
Good night.
Thanks very much. Bye.